My name is Claire. I'm 38 years old, and the family farm has been both my inheritance and my burden. When I tell people I grew up on a farm, they smile politely, imagining some quaint picture of rolling hills, red barns, and hay rides in the fall. And yes, sometimes it was exactly that. But for me, it was also the center of everything: our family's pride, our history, and our bloodline's anchor. The farm wasn't just where I lived. It was where I learned what it meant to work until your back ached and your hands blistered, only to wake up the next day and do it all over again. It was where my father taught me the value of keeping promises, not just to people, but to the land itself. The earth remembers how you treat it, he used to say. Respect it, and it'll take care of you. I can still picture him, his face weathered but kind, leaning against the wooden fence as the sun came up. He loved this farm more than anything else in the world. And now, as he grows older and slower, that love has passed down to me whether I wanted it or not. Some days, I feel that weight pressing down on me. At 38, most of my friends are living in suburban neighborhoods, their weekends filled with brunches or yoga retreats. My weekends are spent fixing fences, checking irrigation, and making sure our cattle are fed. My life doesn't look like theirs, but I've never resented that. Because this land, it's mine, it's ours, it's home. But lately, home hasn't felt as safe. My siblings, who grew up here, same as me, see the farm differently now. To them, it's not a legacy, it's a payday. Every time they visit, I see it in their eyes, hear it in their casual comments. You know, Claire, developers would pay a fortune for this land. Or, Dad could live comfortably if we just sold. They don't mean we, they mean me. They mean this place. They mean ripping apart the soil that 3 generations of our family worked with their bare hands, all for a pile of money they'll burn through in a few years. It cuts deeper than they realize. I look at the barns, still standing after decades of storms. I walk through the orchard my grandfather planted, its blossoms like snow in the spring. I sit in the kitchen of the farmhouse, the same kitchen where my grandmother baked bread every morning at dawn. How can they not see the worth in that? How can they measure its value only in dollars and not in memories, sweat, and sacrifice? My father is still alive, though his health isn't what it used to be. He sits in his chair on the porch, watching the fields as if trying to memorize them. I know he hears their demands too. I know it hurts him as much as it hurts me. But he doesn't speak up anymore, not like he used to. Age has softened his voice, though not his love for this place. And so it falls to me. I may not have asked for this responsibility, but it's mine now. And I'll be damned if I let my siblings, my own flesh and blood, bully me into selling the very thing that defines us. Still, a seed of doubt lingers. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I'm being selfish. Am I clinging to the past when I should be thinking of the future? Am I holding on to the farm because I love it or because I'm afraid of what life looks like without it? But then the morning comes, and the light spills across the fields, and I remember. This farm is more than acres and dollars. It's who we are. It's who I am. And if my siblings think they can strip that away from me, they're in for a fight they never saw coming. Because the day they told Dad to sell the farm was the day I started planning a future without them in it. The demand came over dinner, and it felt less like a conversation and more like an ambush. It was a chilly Sunday evening when my siblings descended on the farmhouse. They'd called earlier in the week, insisting we all needed to talk, which already put a knot in my stomach. Whenever they said that, it usually meant they had an agenda, and it rarely aligned with mine. Robert, my older brother, arrived first, his shiny SUV crunching up the gravel drive. He stepped out in his designer coat, phone glued to his hand, barely glancing at the barn or fields as he walked to the door. He had long since traded farm boots for polished loafers and thought the rest of us were foolish for staying behind. Then came Anna, my younger sister. She carried a bottle of wine and a nervous smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. Anna had always been the peacemaker, but in recent years, she'd grown sharper, more calculating, especially when money was on the table. Finally, Mark showed up, the middle child who had once been my closest ally growing up. He used to help me fix fences, milk cows, and sneak cookies from the pantry, but adulthood had changed him. He now lived 2 states away, chasing promotions and vacations, and only came back when there was something to be gained. I cooked dinner the way I always did when they visited: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread from the oven. I tried to hold on to hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be one of those rare nights where we laughed and reminisced about the past. But as we sat down at the table, I noticed something different. The way they glanced at each other, the way Robert cleared his throat like he was about to lead a board meeting, the way Anna wrung her napkin in her lap. It wasn't long before Robert dropped the bomb. "Claire," he said, his tone falsely casual, "we've been talking, and we think it's time Dad sells the farm." The words hit me like a slap. I set down my fork slowly. "Excuse me?" Anna jumped in quickly, her voice soft, as though cushioning the blow. "What Robert means is, Dad isn't well, Claire. He can't keep up with this place anymore. And you've done so much. But it's not fair to put it all on you. Selling would give everyone peace of mind." I stared at her, stunned. Peace of mind for who? Because it doesn't sound like you're talking about Dad or me. Mark leaned forward, his expression serious. "Claire, be realistic. This land is worth millions. Developers have been circling for years. We could split the profit and make sure Dad has the best care possible. Isn't that what matters most?" My chest tightened. Of course they mentioned Dad's care, it was the perfect excuse. But I knew better. They weren't worried about him. They were worried about their bank accounts. "Dad loves this farm," I said firmly. "He built his life on it. He's still alive, Mark. Don't talk about it like it's already gone." Robert sighed, as though I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Claire, don't be naive. Sentiment doesn't pay bills. This place is nothing but a financial burden. You've been killing yourself keeping it afloat, and for what? Nostalgia?" I felt heat rising in my face. "It's not nostalgia, it's legacy. It's our family's history." Anna reached for my hand, her voice syrupy sweet. "We know you're attached, Claire. But think of the future. With the money from the sale, we could all live comfortably. We could invest, travel, even help our own kids. Isn't that worth more than old barns and dusty fields?" Her words cut deep. Old barns, dusty fields. That was how they saw it. Not as the place where we grew up. Not as the land that carried our ancestors' sweat. Just real estate with a price tag. I pulled my hand back. "No. It's not worth more." Silence fell over the table. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd let it drop. But Robert leaned in, his eyes hard. "Claire, we're not asking, we're telling you. Dad needs to sell. And if you won't push for it, we will." It felt like the ground had dropped beneath me. "You'd go behind my back?" Mark shrugged. "We'll do whatever it takes to do what's best." "You can't stop progress, Claire." I sat there, staring at the 3 of them, the people who shared my blood, the people who once ran barefoot through these fields with me, and felt something inside me break. They weren't here for Dad. They weren't here for the farm. They were here for themselves. Dinner ended quickly after that. I cleared the plates in silence while they muttered about timelines and possibilities, already speaking as though the farm was theirs to divide. When they left, the house felt colder than ever. I walked out onto the porch and looked over the fields, the moonlight casting silver over the wheat. My chest ached, but beneath the ache was a spark. They thought they could bully me. They thought they could reduce our legacy to dollar signs. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because in that moment, I decided if they wanted to sell the farm, I'd rather burn every bridge than let them win. That night, I sat awake staring out at the fields, and all I could think was, if they get their way, everything my family built will vanish. The farmhouse was quiet after my siblings left, but my mind wasn't. Their words echoed in my ears like thunder. "Sell the farm. Developers will pay millions. Don't be naive." Naive? I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the dark expanse of land that had carried us through generations. The orchard swayed gently in the breeze. The barn, old and creaking, yes, but still standing strong, rose like a sentinel in the moonlight. To me, these weren't just things. They were proof of endurance, of sacrifice, of love poured into soil. But my siblings saw none of that. To them, it was just a transaction waiting to happen. I remembered my father's hands, rough and calloused, wrapping mine around the reins of a horse when I was 7. "The land will test you, Claire," he'd said. "It'll break your back, but it'll also feed you, clothe you, and give you a place to belong. Don't ever forget it's alive, and it remembers who cares for it." I never forgot, but clearly, Robert, Anna, and Mark had. The thought of bulldozers tearing into our fields made my stomach twist. Developers would pave over the orchard, flatten the barn, cut the land into lots for cookie-cutter houses with driveways and lawns. The farmhouse would probably be torn down too, wiped away like it had never stood. And with it would go my grandparents' laughter, my mother's Sunday dinners, the endless summer afternoons where I lay in the grass staring at the clouds, all erased, replaced with concrete. Was that what my siblings wanted? To erase us? I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering despite the warmth inside. Part of me wondered if I was wrong. Maybe I was too sentimental. Maybe I was clinging to something that had run its course. It was true, Dad was older now. The farm wasn't as productive as it once had been. Money was tight, and I'd been stretching every dollar to keep things afloat. Would selling really be so bad? Would it free me from the burden? But the thought of signing those papers, of handing our land over to strangers who didn't care about it, filled me with dread. It wouldn't free me, it would haunt me. And what about Dad? He hadn't said much when the others made their demands, but I'd seen the way his eyes darkened. Selling the farm would crush him. He might not be strong enough to fight them, but I could. Still, the weight pressed down on me. My siblings weren't just greedy, they were united. And I was only one person. Could I really stand against them all? I thought about legacy. That word had been circling in my mind all night. What did it mean? To Robert, Anna, and Mark, it meant inheritance money they could spend, investments they could make. But to me, legacy meant roots. It meant connection. It meant passing something real, something solid, to the next generation. Maybe I didn't have children of my own. Maybe I'd never pass this farm to a son or daughter. But did that mean it deserved to die with me? No. Legacy wasn't just about bloodlines. It was about stewardship. And if my siblings had abandoned that duty, then it was mine alone. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the fields in shades of gold, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't let them destroy this place. Not while I had breath left in me. Still, I knew the battle ahead would be ugly. They'd try to pressure Dad, manipulate him, maybe even drag me through legal fights. I couldn't fight them with anger alone. I needed a plan, something they wouldn't see coming. And that thought led me to someone I hadn't considered in years. A cousin, the one they all hated, mocked, and dismissed. The one they swore would never set foot on this farm again. The memory of him stirred something in me, an idea, faint but growing. My siblings thought they had me cornered. But maybe, just maybe, the farm's future didn't belong to them at all. And as the sun rose over the fields, I realized the farm's survival might depend on the very person they despised most. It didn't take long for their masks of concern to slip, and when they did, the greed underneath was blinding. The week after our disastrous dinner, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Robert first, then Anna, then Mark. Each of them circling me like vultures around carrion. At first, they pretended civility. Robert asked if I'd had time to think it over. Anna sent me links to retirement communities with glossy brochures, saying Dad deserved something nicer. Mark even offered to fly me out to visit him, as though a weekend trip could soften me into compliance. But beneath their words, I could hear it. Urgency. Impatience. A hunger they could no longer disguise. One evening, Robert called again. His voice was sharp this time, all pretense gone. "Claire, this isn't just about you being sentimental. We're talking millions here. Do you understand that? Millions." You think it's wise to let all that money rot away in cornfields? Rot away? I repeated, my grip tightening on the phone. Those cornfields fed us. They built this family. He scoffed. Oh, come on. That was decades ago. This isn't about some romantic idea of farming, it's about value. And right now, the value is in selling. Before I could respond, he added, and don't think you can stop this. Dad's name is still on those papers. He listens to us too. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. But the next day, Anna arrived in person. She breezed into the farmhouse with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, carrying a stack of printouts. Claire, I did some research, she said, spreading them across the kitchen table. Look at this comparable land sold for over $3 million last year. $3 million. Do you realize what that could mean for us? For you? For me? I asked. Yes, she said eagerly. You've been working yourself to death here. Imagine what you could do with that money. You could move into town, start fresh, never worry about another fence or broken tractor again. And Dad? I asked quietly. Her smile faltered. Well, he'd have the best care money could buy. Isn't that what matters? I studied her face, the way her eyes lit up, not at the thought of Dad's comfort, but at the number on the page. She couldn't even hide it. Later that week, Mark showed up. He wasn't as polished as Robert or as sugary as Anna. He went straight for blunt. Look, Claire, he said, standing in the doorway of the barn. We all know the truth. You can't keep this place running forever. You don't have the money, you don't have the manpower. Why drag this out? Sell now, split the profit, and we all walk away richer. And what about Dad's wishes? I asked. Mark shrugged. Dad doesn't know what's best anymore. He's stuck in the past. We can't let nostalgia dictate smart decisions. I stared at him, speechless. This was the same brother who once stayed up all night helping me deliver a calf. His hands covered in straw and sweat, his eyes shining with pride when the animal finally took its first breath. And now he was talking about bulldozing everything we'd built. The three of them weren't even hiding it anymore. They didn't care about Dad. They didn't care about me. They didn't care about the farm. They cared about money, cold, hard cash. The final straw came one evening when I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. They'd gathered in Robert's SUV after Sunday dinner, thinking I was inside. But I'd stepped out onto the porch for some air, and their voices drifted through the cracked windows. $3 million, split 4 ways, Robert said. That's at least $750,000 each, maybe more. We could all use that. Anna chimed in, her voice sharper than usual. Assuming Claire doesn't drag her heels. She's always been too attached. We might need to push harder. Mark laughed bitterly. Push harder? If she won't budge, we'll push Dad. He'll listen to us before he listens to her. Good, Robert said. Because if Claire thinks she can stand in our way, she's in for a rude awakening. Their laughter rang out like nails on glass. I stood frozen on the porch, every word piercing deeper than the last. In that moment, the illusion shattered completely. Any pretense that they cared about Dad, about legacy, about anything other than themselves, it was gone. They weren't family anymore. They were predators. I clenched my fists, staring out at the fields under the fading light. They thought they had me cornered, that their greed would overpower my resolve. But they were wrong. Because if they wanted to expose themselves as nothing more than vultures, then fine, I'd let them, and I'd make sure their greed was the very thing that cost them everything. And as their laughter echoed in the night, I swore to myself. They would never touch this farm, not while I had breath in my body. When greed surrounded me, I turned to the land itself for answers. After overhearing my siblings that night, I couldn't go back inside. I stayed on the porch long after their car lights disappeared down the gravel road. The sky stretched wide and endless, stars glimmering like sparks against velvet, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry. Not because I felt defeated, but because I finally understood the weight of what I was fighting for. The farm had always been more than dirt and fences. It was a living memory, stitched with every sacrifice my family had made. When I closed my eyes, I could hear the echoes. My father's voice calling me to rise before dawn. My mother humming softly as she picked tomatoes from the garden. My grandparents' laughter around the table after a long harvest day. Every inch of this land carried a story. I walked down the porch steps, the grass cool beneath my shoes, and wandered through the fields. The soil smelled rich, alive. My father always said the earth held secrets, lessons written in its cracks and furrows. And if I listened, maybe I could hear them. I remembered summers when the sun beat down so hot our skin blistered, but we kept working, row after row. Winters when snow threatened to crush the barns, and Dad and I stayed up all night shoveling the roof, our breath clouds in the frozen air. Springs when storms flattened half the crops, and we planted again anyway. Hands raw but spirits unbroken. The farm had never been easy, but it had always been worth it. I wandered past the orchard, its branches bare in the winter chill. My grandfather planted it when he returned from the war. He'd told my father that after surviving so much destruction, he wanted to create life that would outlast him. And it had. Those trees had fed generations. Their blossoms a promise that no matter how harsh the winter, spring would always return. What would my grandfather say if he knew his descendants wanted to sell it all for cash? I reached the barn, pressing a hand against the weathered wood. I remembered being a little girl, hiding in the hayloft while Robert and Mark tried to find me. I remembered Anna, chasing kittens across the floor. I remembered Dad teaching me how to drive the tractor, his hand steady on mine. So many firsts, so much history, and now they wanted to erase it all. The thought made me ache, but it also made me furious. My siblings didn't see these memories. They didn't feel the sweat embedded in the soil. They didn't hear the echoes. All they saw was profit, but I wouldn't let the farm fall into hands that didn't respect it. As I stood there in the dark, I realized something important. This fight wasn't about me. It wasn't even just about Dad. It was about every ancestor who had poured their life into this place. It was about every generation to come who might still walk these fields. If I gave up, I wouldn't just be betraying myself. I'd be betraying them. I thought back to my childhood, when Dad made me really promise that I would never treat the farm like a disposable thing. "Claire," he'd said, his eyes serious. "This land is sacred. It's not just ours. We're only borrowing it from the future. Borrowing it from the future." Those words burned in my chest. My siblings didn't care about the future, they cared about their bank accounts. But maybe the farm didn't belong to them at all. Maybe it belonged to someone who still understood what it meant to borrow and to protect. And that was when the memory of my cousin surfaced again. The cousin they all despised. The cousin they had mocked, shunned, and dismissed as if he weren't family. I hadn't thought about him in years, but suddenly, the pieces fell into place. Because if I couldn't trust my siblings to guard this land, maybe I could trust him. The idea sparked like lightning. Dangerous, maybe, but real. I brushed my hand over the barn door one last time before heading back to the farmhouse. My tears had dried, replaced with determination. I had a long fight ahead, and I knew my siblings wouldn't go quietly. But now, for the first time, I had a vision of how to win. The land itself had reminded me of who I was, of what I stood for, of why this farm couldn't be sold. And it had whispered the truth. The farm's future didn't lie with the greedy. It lay with someone who still understood what family truly meant. And as I fell asleep that night, one thought circled in my mind: I needed to find my cousin before my siblings destroyed everything. If anyone had told me the farm's salvation would lie with the cousin my siblings despised, I might have laughed. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling beams of the old farmhouse, his face kept appearing in my mind. My cousin Daniel. Daniel and I had grown up together, running through the same fields, playing hide-and-seek in the barn, sneaking apples from the orchard. He was only 2 years older than me, and for most of our childhood, we were inseparable. But by the time we reached adulthood, things had changed. He didn't follow the straight path my siblings approved of. He wasn't polished like Robert, or ambitious like Mark, or sweet-faced like Anna. Daniel was stubborn, rough around the edges, unafraid to speak his mind, and that made him a target. My siblings never forgave him for the summer he refused to work under Robert's orders during harvest. Robert, always power-hungry, had barked commands like he owned the place. Daniel had dropped his pitchfork and said flatly, "You don't boss me, you're not, Dad." That one act of defiance lit a fire of resentment that never went out. Later, when Daniel chose trade school over college, Robert sneered that he'd settle for scraps. Mark called him unmotivated. Anna said he embarrassed the family. They painted him as the black sheep and never looked back. But I remembered the truth. Daniel was hardworking, loyal, and deeply tied to the land. He fixed tractors better than anyone, mended fences without being asked, and always stayed late during planting season just to make sure every row was perfect. He loved this farm. Maybe not in words, but in action. And wasn't that what mattered most? The last time I saw him, he had come by after Dad's health started declining. He stood awkwardly on the porch, holding a bag of groceries. "Thought I'd drop these off," he'd said. Robert had been there too. And I still remember the way Robert's face twisted. "We don't need charity from you," he snapped, slamming the door in Daniel's face. Daniel hadn't come back after that. But I had seen the hurt in his eyes. The way he lingered for a moment before walking away. My siblings thought they'd driven him out forever. But what if they hadn't? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. If the farm couldn't stay with Dad forever, and if I couldn't trust Robert, Mark, or Anna, then maybe Daniel was the answer. Maybe the very person they despised was the one who could save it. The idea scared me. But it also filled me with hope. The next morning, I found Dad sitting on the porch, his blanket draped over his lap. His eyes were tired. But when he saw me, he smiled faintly. "Didn't sleep much, huh?" he asked. "Not really," I admitted, sitting beside him. "I've been thinking." He didn't press, just waited. That was Dad's way. He let silence do the asking. "Finally," I said, "what if the farm doesn't go to Robert, or Anna, or Mark? What if it goes to Daniel?" Dad blinked, then chuckled softly. "Daniel, Lord, I haven't heard his name around here in a long time." I nodded. "I know the others hate him. But he's the only one who ever really cared about this place. He worked harder than any of them. He respected the land. My throat tightened. He's like you, Dad. He understands it." Dad was quiet for a long time. His gaze fixed on the fields. Finally, he said, "Your grandpa always said Daniel had good hands. Honest hands. Maybe the others couldn't see it, but I did." I swallowed hard. "Do you think he'd want it?" Dad smiled faintly. "If it's between Daniel and your siblings, I'd bet my life on him." That was all the confirmation I needed. Still, reaching out wouldn't be easy. I hadn't spoken to Daniel in years. Would he even take my call? Would he still want anything to do with a family that treated him like dirt? I decided I had to try. That evening, I dug through an old address book until I found his number. My hand shook as I dialed. And for a moment, I almost hung up. But then his voice answered. Rough and familiar. "Hello? Daniel. It's Claire." A pause. "Claire. Well, this is a surprise." I took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you. About the farm." Silence again, but this time heavier. Then, finally, he said, "All right. When?" "Tomorrow. Here. At the house." When I hung up, my heart was racing. Tomorrow would be the first step. Tomorrow, I'd know if this crazy idea was possible. And if it was, then my siblings were in for a shock they'd never recover from. Because the moment Daniel stepped back onto this farm, the future of our family would change forever. When Daniel pulled into the driveway, it felt like the past walking back into my life. His truck was old, rusted around the edges, the kind of vehicle that spoke of hard work rather than show. As he stepped out, taller and broader than I remembered, His face carried the years' lines carved deep from sun and labor, but his eyes were the same. Steady, watchful. "Claire," he said, giving me a nod. "Daniel," I replied, my voice catching a little. "Thank you for coming. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. The history between us was enough." I led him into the kitchen, where the scent of coffee lingered. He sat at the table, leaning back in the chair like he had 100 times before when we were kids. For a moment, it felt like no time had passed at all. But then, reality settled back in. "You said you wanted to talk about the farm," Daniel said, his voice cautious. I nodded. "Yes, you know Dad isn't doing well. And Robert, Anna, and Mark, they're pressing him to sell." His jaw tightened. "Figures. They see money," I continued. "Nothing else. But I can't let them destroy this place, Daniel. I won't." He studied me for a long moment. "And where do I come in?" I took a breath. "I want you to have it." His eyes widened, and for the first time in years, I saw him caught off guard. "Me?" "Yes. You always loved this land. You respected it. You worked harder than any of them ever did. I can't trust them with it, but I think I can trust you." For a moment, silence stretched between us. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his rough hands clasped. "You realize what you're saying?" he asked. "I do." "And you realize what they'll do if they find out?" I nodded slowly. "They'll hate me, but they already hate me for standing in their way. At least this way the farm survives." He sat back, shaking his head slightly. "Claire, they despise me, always have. You hand this farm to me and they'll never forgive you." I looked him in the eye. "They already don't forgive me. They think I'm weak, naive, sentimental. But this isn't about them anymore. It's about doing what's right." For a long time, he said nothing. Then, finally, he exhaled, almost a laugh. "You haven't changed, still stubborn as hell." "And you?" I asked softly. "Would you even want it?" His expression shifted, softer now. "Claire, I'd give anything for this place. Always have. But I didn't think I'd ever be welcome again." "You are," I said firmly. "At least to me. And Dad would agree. He still speaks of you with respect." Daniel's eyes flickered at that, as though the words meant more than he'd admit. We talked for hours that night, about the farm's future, about what he would do with it, how he'd repair the barns, expand the orchard, and keep the soil alive rather than selling it off. He spoke with passion, not greed, his voice steady and grounded. And with every word, my conviction grew stronger. This was the right choice. When the conversation finally quieted, he asked me, "So how do we do this? Without them finding out?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice though the house was empty. "We do it quietly. With a lawyer. We change the paperwork. Make it ironclad. By the time they realize, it'll be too late." Daniel nodded slowly. "All right, if you're sure about this, Claire, I'll stand with you. Whatever fight comes, I'll take it." Relief washed over me like rain after a drought. For the first time since my siblings demanded the sale, I felt less alone. Still, I knew the risks. If they discovered our plan before it was finished, they'd come down on me with everything they had. But if we stayed quiet, if we worked in secret, then maybe, just maybe, we could save the farm. As Daniel stood to leave, he placed a hand on the back of the chair, hesitating. "Claire," he said quietly, "thank you for trusting me when no one else did." I met his eyes. "Thank you for proving I was right to." We didn't hug then either, but the bond between us was stronger than any embrace. I watched him drive away, his taillights fading into the night. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't fear this time. It was resolve. The war had begun, even if my siblings didn't know it yet, and I wasn't fighting alone anymore. But secrets have a way of slipping out, and I knew it was only a matter of time before my siblings began to suspect. They didn't come to talk this time, they came to corner me. It was a gray Saturday afternoon when Robert's SUV pulled into the driveway again, followed closely by Anna's sedan and Mark's rental car. I was in the yard stacking wood when I saw them step out, their faces grim, their shoulders squared. They weren't here for dinner or small talk, they were here for war. Claire. Robert barked before he even reached the porch. We need to settle this once and for all. I set the logs down and wiped my hands on my jeans, bracing myself. Settle what? You know damn well what, Mark said, his voice tight. The farm. Dad. The sale. We've been patient. But enough is enough. Anna's eyes darted nervously between them, as if she wanted to soften the blow. But she stood with them all the same. I crossed my arms. Dad's not ready to sell, and neither am I. Robert stepped forward, his jaw clenched. Claire, stop hiding behind Dad. He's too old to make these decisions. This responsibility falls on us now, and we're telling you it's time to let go. The way he said it, telling me, made my blood boil. You don't get to tell me what to do with this land, I snapped. Mark scoffed. This isn't just your land. It's all of ours. And you're being selfish by holding on to it. Selfish? I shot back. I'm the one breaking my back every day to keep it running. Where are you when the fences collapse? Where are you when the crops fail? You don't lift a finger, but you want the reward. Robert's face reddened. You think this is about work? It's about smart choices. This farm isn't profitable anymore. You're throwing your life away on a sinking ship. Anna finally spoke, her tone softer but no less insistent. Claire, please, we're not trying to hurt you. We just want what's best for everyone. If we sell now, we can ensure Dad's care and still have enough left over for all of us. Why can't you see that? Because what they called best was nothing more than greed dressed up in pretty words. I shook my head. I see it just fine. You want cash. That's all this is about. Mark's eyes flashed. You're damn right we want cash. Do you have any idea how much money we're talking about? This land is worth more than any of us will ever see again. And you're standing in the way of it. Robert jabbed a finger at me. You can't stop this forever, Claire. Dad trusts us too. And we'll get him to sign if you won't. Don't think you're the only one with a say. His threat cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Dad was weaker these days, easier to sway. If they pressed him hard enough, maybe they could break through his tired defenses. The thought made my stomach twist. But I kept my face calm. You can try, I said evenly. But Dad knows where I stand. And he knows this farm means more than money. Robert's laugh was cold. You think he'll back you forever? He's old, Claire. Old and tired. Sooner or later, he'll see reason. Anna touched my arm, her eyes pleading. Please, Claire, don't make this harder than it has to be. If you keep fighting us, you'll only isolate yourself. We're family. We should be united. Family. The word tasted bitter. I pulled my arm away. Family doesn't ambush family with ultimatums. Family doesn't circle like vultures waiting for the body to fall. Silence fell, heavy and sharp. Even Anna looked stunned at my words. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice hard. Then hear us clearly. If you don't agree to sell, we'll make sure you regret it. We'll fight you for this land. You can't win, Claire. Inside, my heart pounded. But outwardly, I held my ground. Maybe not, I said. But I won't lose it. Your way either. They didn't know it yet, but the papers were already in motion. Daniel and I had started meeting with a lawyer, quietly rewriting the future while they raged about the present. They thought their ultimatum cornered me, but in reality, I was already 2 steps ahead. Robert finally shook his head. Disgusted. You're making a huge mistake. No, I replied softly. The mistake was thinking you could bully me into betraying everything this farm stands for. They left soon after, their anger spilling into the cold air as they slammed car doors and roared down the gravel drive. I stood in the yard long after the dust settled, my fists still clenched. Their ultimatum had been meant to break me, Instead, it hardened me. Because now I knew for certain there was no reconciliation, no middle ground. It was them or the farm. And I'd already chosen. And little did they know, while they were planning their victory, I was preparing the one move that would end the game for good. If my siblings wanted a war, then the battlefield would be the law and I was ready. The morning after their ultimatum, I called Daniel. My voice was steady, though my stomach churned. "It's time," I told him. "Time for what?" he asked. "For the paperwork. For the fight." There was a pause, then his calm reply. "Tell me where to meet you." That afternoon, we drove into town together, the silence in the truck heavy but comforting. Neither of us needed to say much, we both knew what was at stake. When we pulled up to the small brick building with the brass plate that read Carver and Lane Attorneys, my palms began to sweat. Inside, the lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Miss Lane, welcomed us into her office. Her handshake was firm, her voice brisk. "Claire, I understand the situation. You want to ensure your family farm remains protected, even against your siblings' wishes, correct?" I nodded. "Yes, they're circling like vultures. If they get their way, they'll sell everything. I need to stop them." Miss Lane's eyes flicked to Daniel. "And you want the farm to pass to him?" I swallowed, then nodded again. "He's the only one I trust." Daniel shifted slightly in his chair but said nothing, his jaw set. Miss Lane folded her hands. "Then here's what we'll do. First, we'll prepare a transfer agreement naming Daniel as the inheritor of the property. We'll draft it in a way that is legally airtight, ironclad against challenges. Once your father signs, the deed will reflect Daniel's rights immediately upon his passing." My heart pounded. "And if my siblings try to contest it?" She gave a thin smile. "They'll lose. It won't stop them from trying, of course. But with the right language, they'll be throwing money into a losing battle." I glanced at Daniel, whose expression remained unreadable. Finally, he asked, "Are you sure about this, Claire? Once you do this, there's no going back." I met his eyes. "I'm sure. If it means protecting the farm, I'll pay whatever price it takes." He gave a small nod, as though sealing the unspoken pact between us. Miss Lane began gathering papers, explaining every clause and condition. She advised us to move quickly. My siblings had already hinted at pressuring Dad, and we couldn't risk them acting first. When we left the office, Daniel exhaled deeply. "Well, Claire," he said, "you've just lit the fuse." I almost smiled. "Then let's make sure it explodes in the right direction." That evening, I sat with Dad on the porch. His blanket was pulled tight against the evening chill, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I explained everything: how Robert, Anna, and Mark were circling, how they wanted to force a sale, how Daniel was willing to protect the land. Dad listened quietly, his face lined with fatigue but also pride. When I finished, he placed his hand over mine. "You've done right, Claire," he said softly. "You've always been the one who understood. Your mother would be proud." Tears burned in my eyes, but I blinked them away. "Will you sign the papers, Dad? Will you make it official?" His answer came without hesitation. "Yes." The next day, we returned to Miss Lane's office. Dad, frail but resolute, signed the documents with a shaky hand. Each stroke of his pen felt like a shield being raised, a wall built brick by brick to guard the farm from the greedy hands waiting outside. When it was done, Miss Lane slid the papers into a folder. "It's official," she said. "The farm will pass directly to Daniel. Your siblings can rage all they want, but legally, their voices won't matter." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Relief flooded through me, mingled with triumph. For the first time, the future of the farm felt secure. But even as we drove home, I knew the battle wasn't over. My siblings would sense something. They'd pry, push, and demand answers, and when they found out what I had done, their rage would be volcanic. I glanced at Daniel, his profile steady as he drove. "They're going to hate us for this," I murmured. He smirked slightly. "They already hate me. As for you, maybe it's time they learned you're not as easy to push around as they think." His words steadied me. Because he was right. I wasn't the timid little sister anymore. I wasn't their obstacle, I was their reckoning. That night, I stood at the edge of the fields, the papers locked safely inside the farmhouse. The wind whispered through the crops, carrying the scent of soil and life. I felt the presence of generations before me, my father, my grandfather, all those who had worked and bled for this land. I whispered into the night. It's safe now. I promise you it's safe. But deep down, I knew safety was only temporary. Because sooner or later, my siblings would discover what I had done. And when they did, all hell would break loose. And sure enough, it wouldn't be long before they demanded another family meeting, one that would end with the truth exploding in their faces. I knew the storm was coming. The second, Robert called and said, "We need another family meeting." His tone was clipped, controlled, the way it always was when he thought he had the upper hand. He wanted to meet at the farmhouse, of course on neutral ground, as he put it. But the farmhouse was never neutral. It was my ground, Dad's ground, the land itself standing witness to everything we were about to say. They arrived in their usual order. Robert first, suit jacket pressed even on a Saturday. Anna second, clutching her purse like it held her courage. Mark last, his eyes already narrowed, as if preparing for a fight. Dad sat in his chair on the porch, bundled in his blanket. He was weaker these days, but when Robert suggested he stay inside, Dad's voice was firm. "I'll be here," he said. "This concerns me too." That silenced them. We all gathered around the kitchen table, just as we had countless times before, though the air was heavier now. Robert cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Claire, we've given you time, we've tried patience, but it's been weeks and nothing's moving forward. We need to make a decision tonight." I kept my face calm. "A decision has already been made." Mark frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the farm isn't being sold," I said flatly. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert's jaw clenched. "Claire, stop this nonsense. You can't." "I can," I interrupted. "Dad and I have already taken steps. The farm is protected. There won't be a sale." Anna's face went pale. "What steps?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at each of them in turn, letting the weight of my words sink in. "It's done. That's all you need to know." Mark slammed his hand on the table. "No. That's not how this works. You don't get to make unilateral decisions about something that belongs to all of us." I leaned forward. "Where have you been, Mark? When I was fixing fences at midnight? Where were you when I was hauling hay, or paying bills? Or sitting up with Dad when he couldn't breathe? You want to claim ownership now, but this farm hasn't belonged to you in years. Not in sweat, not in sacrifice, not in care." Anna's eyes welled with tears. "Claire, please, we're family. Can't we talk this through?" "No, Anna," I said softly. "We can't. Because every time we talk, you all turn this into numbers. Into profit. Into what you'll get out of it. And I won't be part of that." Robert leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold. "So what did you do?" he demanded. "What steps did you take? Did you go to a lawyer? Did you change the will?" I didn't flinch. "Yes." The word landed like a grenade. Anna gasped. Mark cursed under his breath. Robert's face turned red. "You had no right," he hissed. "I had every right," I said. Dad agreed. He signed. The farm's future is no longer up for debate. For a moment, chaos broke out, shouting, accusations, Anna pleading for calm, Mark demanding to see the paperwork. But through it all, Dad's voice cut through, steady and firm. "Enough." The room fell silent. Dad looked at each of them, his eyes tired but sharp. "Claire has done what I asked her to. What I wanted. You think you know better, but you don't. You've lost sight of what this farm means. It's not a payday. It's not a development project. It's our family's soul. And you were ready to sell it like scrap." His words silenced even Robert, though his jaw still worked furiously. Anna whispered. But if it's not being sold, then what happens to it? Oh, I hesitated, the truth pressing at my lips. I wanted to tell them everything that Daniel was, heir, that their greed had cost them everything. But I held back. Not yet. The time wasn't right. Instead, I simply said, "It stays in the family. That's all you need to know." It was half a truth, but it kept them guessing. Mark stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "This isn't over. You think you can hide whatever you've done, but we'll find out. And when we do, you'll regret this." Robert followed, muttering curses, his face twisted with fury. Anna lingered a moment, her eyes searching mine. "Claire, please don't destroy us." But I didn't answer. They left in a storm of footsteps and slamming doors, the roar of engines fading into the night. When the house was quiet again, I exhaled slowly. Dad reached for my hand. "You did well," he said softly. But even as I nodded, my heart raced. Because I knew this wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. And when the truth finally came out, when they learned who I had given the farm to, their rage would erupt like wildfire. I could have eased them into the truth. But some truths are best delivered like a hammer. The storm came faster than I expected. Only a week after our family meeting, Robert called again, his voice sharp and edged with triumph. "We know you changed something," he said. "We spoke with Dad's old attorney, and he confirmed you've been making new arrangements. You think you're clever, Claire, but you're not. Now tell us exactly what you did." I kept my tone calm. "If you want answers, come tomorrow night, all of you. I'll explain everything." When I hung up, my hands trembled. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for, the moment I'd been both dreading and craving. The next evening, they arrived together, tension radiating off them like heat. Anna wrung her hands, her face pale. Mark glared at me, his jaw tight. Robert strode in like he owned the place, his eyes blazing. Dad sat in his chair at the head of the table, silent but watchful. Daniel was there too, standing quietly in the corner. The second my siblings saw him, their faces twisted. "What the hell is he doing here?" Robert spat. Mark sneered. "Unbelievable. You bring him into this?" Anna's voice trembled. "Claire, please tell me he's not." I raised a hand. "Sit down, all of you. You wanted the truth, here at Island." They reluctantly sat, though their glares could have burned holes through me. I took a deep breath. Dad signed new papers. The farm is protected. And when the time comes, it won't be yours. It won't be sold to developers. It won't be split for cash. It will go to Daniel. The explosion was instant. Robert shot to his feet, slamming his hands on the table. "What?" Mark's face turned crimson. "You can't be serious. Him? He doesn't deserve it." Anna gasped, tears welling in her eyes. "Claire, how could you do this?" He's not," she broke off, unable to finish. "He's family," I said firmly. "More family than the three of you put together. He's the only one who ever cared about this land for what it is, not what it's worth." Robert's voice dripped venom. "This is betrayal. You went behind our backs and handed everything to a man who abandoned this family years ago." Daniel finally spoke, his voice steady but cold. "I didn't abandon anyone. I was pushed out. By you, because I wouldn't bow to your arrogance." Mark pointed a finger at him. "You don't belong here. You never did." Daniel took a step forward. "Funny, I worked these fields more than either of you ever did. I fixed your tractors, mended your fences, and bled for this farm while you ran off chasing easy money. Don't tell me I don't belong." The room crackled with rage. Robert turned back to me, his face twisted. "You've ruined everything, Claire. Do you understand that? We had a chance to finally be free, to finally profit from all this work, and you gave it away to him?" I rose to my feet, my voice sharp. "Free? Profit? You didn't do the work. You didn't stay. You didn't care about Dad, about the land, about any of it. You wanted to cash in on something you never earned. And yes, I gave it to Daniel. Because he's the only one who deserves it." Anna sobbed into her hands. Mark stormed toward the door, muttering curses. Robert stood frozen, his fists clenched, his body trembling with fury. "This isn't over," he growled. "We'll fight this in court. We'll tear that paper apart." Dad's voice, quiet but firm, cut through the chaos. "No, you won't." They turned, startled. Dad's eyes were sharper than I'd seen in weeks. "I signed it. I meant it. This land doesn't belong to you. You don't love it. You don't respect it. But Daniel does. Claire does. That's why it's theirs." His words silenced even Robert. For a moment, all I heard was the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Finally, Robert hissed through his teeth. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, meeting his glare. "But I'll never regret saving the farm." One by one, they stormed out. Anna last, pausing at the doorway with tears streaming down her face. "You've destroyed this family," she whispered. I almost told her the truth that greed had destroyed us long ago. But I let her leave in silence. When the door closed, the house felt lighter, though my chest still ached. Daniel stood beside me, his jaw tight. "That went about as well as I expected," he muttered. I let out a shaky laugh. "Better, actually." No one threw a chair. Dad chuckled softly, his eyes glistening. "You did right, Claire. Don't ever doubt it." For the first time in months, I let myself breathe. The truth was out. The battle lines were drawn. And though I knew my siblings weren't done, that they'd come back with lawsuits, threats, and rage, I no longer feared them. Because their farm wasn't theirs to take. Not anymore. But what I didn't realize was that their rage wouldn't just burn. It would spread, turning brother against sister until they destroyed themselves. I thought their anger would be directed at me, but soon, they turned their knives on each other. For the first few days after the revelation, there was silence. No calls, no visits, no texts. It was the quiet before the storm, and though I braced myself for their wrath, I didn't expect how quickly they would implode. It started with Robert. He left me a furious voicemail. "You'll pay for this, Claire. I don't care what Dad signed. I'll drag you and Daniel through court until you choke on legal bills." But instead of rallying support from Anna and Mark, Robert's threats exposed cracks between them. Anna called me a day later, her voice trembling. "I didn't want this, Claire. I never wanted it to come to lawyers. But Robert, he won't let it go. 'Cause it's never been about the farm," I told her gently. "It's about control, about money." She didn't argue. Mark, on the other hand, chose rage. He showed up unannounced one evening, pounding on the farmhouse door until I opened it. His face was red, his eyes wild. "You handed it to him?" he shouted, pointing past me as though Daniel were standing in the kitchen. "You betrayed us for the black sheep." I stood my ground. "I saved the farm from you." "That's not betrayal, that's protection." He cursed and stormed off, tires spitting gravel as he tore down the driveway. By the end of the week, the three of them were fighting each other more than they were fighting me. Robert accused Anna of being weak, of failing to stand firm. Anna accused Mark of stirring chaos and making them all look like fools. Mark accused Robert of trying to control everything for himself. Their unity dissolved like sugar in water. I heard about their arguments from neighbors who spotted them shouting in the diner, from the lawyer who called to warn me they'd tried unsuccessfully to find a loophole in the deed. Even Dad overheard them one afternoon when Robert called, his voice raised so high it carried through the receiver. "They'll tear each other apart," Dad said afterward, shaking his head sadly. "And you won't have to lift a finger." He was right. The more they raged, the more obvious their greed became, not just to me, but to the whole community. People who once respected them began to whisper. Farmers at the co-op muttered about how disgraceful it was to try and sell off the land. Neighbors shook their heads when Anna's tears turned into bitter gossip. The legacy they thought they'd inherit was turning to ash in their hands. Meanwhile, Daniel kept his distance from the storm, focusing on the farm itself. Together, we walked the fields, checking fences, repairing the old barn, talking about plans for the orchard. For the first time in years, the land felt alive again. Loved. Not threatened. But my siblings weren't done yet. One evening, Anna showed up at the farmhouse. She looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed red. "Claire, please," she whispered. "Can't we find a compromise? Robert and Mark, they won't stop. They'll bleed us all dry with lawyers. Maybe if we sold part of the land. Just a little." I cut her off gently. "Anna, you don't get it. This isn't about compromise. It's about choosing what matters. And I've already chosen." Her face crumpled, tears spilling. "They'll never forgive you." "Maybe not," I said softly. "But at least I'll be able to forgive myself." She left quietly, and I knew then she was finished fighting. She'd retreat into silence, unwilling to stand against her brothers but too weary to continue siding with them. That left Robert and Mark. Their feud escalated quickly. Robert, ever the self-appointed leader, pushed for a lawsuit. Mark refused, saying he wouldn't waste a dime chasing something he might not even win. Their arguments grew louder, uglier, spilling into public view. The last I heard, they nearly came to blows outside the courthouse after meeting with yet another attorney who told them the same thing Miss Lane had told me. The will is airtight. You can't win. They were unraveling, and the farm was safe. One night, as Daniel and I sat on the porch, watching the fireflies dance over the fields, he said quietly, "You know, you didn't just save this farm, you saved yourself." I frowned. "What do you mean? You cut the cord," he said simply. "You stopped letting them drain you dry. You chose what mattered. And you let the rest fall away. That's freedom, Claire." I thought about his words long after he left. He was right. For years I had carried the weight of my siblings' opinions, their demands, their disapproval. But now, I felt lighter. For the first time in decades, the farm was truly ours, not theirs. Not the developers. Not anyone's but those who loved it. The fallout was ugly. Yes. But it was also justice. And as my siblings destroyed themselves in their own greed, Daniel and I began quietly building something new, something that would last for generations. While my siblings burned bridges, Daniel quietly built new ones. After the revelation and the chaos that followed, the farm felt strangely peaceful. Not quiet, there was always work to do, always the low hum of life around us, but peaceful in the sense that its heart was beating again. Daniel was everywhere. At sunrise, I'd find him repairing the old gate by the west field. By noon, he'd be knee-deep in the orchard, pruning branches with the same careful precision my grandfather once had. By evening, he'd be in the barn, oiling tools or fixing hinges long since rusted. He never complained, never gloated, never threw my siblings' insults back at them. He simply worked, as though proving through action that he was worthy of the gift he'd been given. One evening, I brought him lemonade as he leaned against the barn, sweat streaking his brow. He accepted the glass with a nod, his rough hands dwarfing it. "You don't have to do all this in one day," I teased gently. He smiled faintly. I'm just making up for lost time." I studied him. The way his eyes scanned the horizon. The way he breathed in the air like it meant something. "Do you resent them?" I asked. "Robert, Mark, Anna, for how they treated you?" Daniel sipped the lemonade before answering. "Resentment's a waste of energy. They showed me who they were a long time ago. Now, I'm just glad you saw who I was." His words lingered with me. Because the truth was, I had seen him all along. Even when my siblings called him the black sheep, I remembered the cousin who stayed late in the fields, who carried more than his share, who treated the land like it mattered. Now, watching him pour himself into the farm, I knew I had made the right choice. Dad saw it too. He often sat on the porch, wrapped in his blanket, quietly observing as Daniel worked. One evening, he said to me, "He reminds me of your grandfather. Not afraid of hard work. Not afraid of being underestimated. That's the kind of man this land needs." And Dad was right. The community began to notice as well. Neighbors who had whispered about our family drama now spoke with admiration. At the diner, people said, Daniel's really turning that place around. At the co-op, farmers nodded and said, "Good to see that land in the right hands." Each word of respect was another brick rebuilding the farm's reputation. One Saturday, Daniel and I walked the orchard together, blossoms just starting to bloom. He reached out, brushing his fingers over a branch. "Your grandfather planted these, didn't he?" I nodded. "Said he wanted to leave something alive behind." Daniel's voice softened. "Then we'll keep them alive. For him. For all of them." The "we" in his words struck me. He wasn't just claiming the land for himself, he was sharing it with me, with Dad, with the generations before us. That was gratitude in its purest form, not taking possession but honoring connection. Later that evening, as we sat on the porch steps, Daniel turned to me. "Claire, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," I replied. "No," he insisted. "I do. Everyone else gave up on me. They said I'd never amount to anything. But you trusted me, with the only thing that really matters. I'll never forget that." I looked at him. Really looked at him, the cousin who had been cast out, who had been mocked and dismissed, now carrying the weight of our family's legacy with quiet strength. And in that moment, I felt something deeper than victory. I felt peace. Because this wasn't just revenge. It wasn't just about denying Robert, Mark, and Anna what they craved. It was about giving the farm to someone who would cherish it. Someone who deserved it. Daniel wasn't perfect, he was rough, stubborn, sometimes too blunt for his own good. But he was honest. And in a world where greed had poisoned my siblings, honesty was worth everything. As the sun dipped low and painted the fields in gold, Daniel raised his glass of lemonade in a quiet toast. "To the farm," he said. I clinked mine against his. "To the farm, and to the future." We sat in silence after that, watching the land breathe around us. And for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt certain the farm was exactly where it belonged. But though Daniel and I found peace, my siblings were far from finished, and their next move would take us all into the courtroom. Some battles aren't won in the fields, they're won in the courtroom. The summons arrived on a Thursday morning. I wasn't surprised when I opened the envelope and saw the names printed across the top: Robert Whitfield, Mark Whitfield, and Anna Whitfield. They were suing me, Dad and Daniel, contesting the new will and demanding that the farm be liquidated for fair distribution. It was the last desperate gasp of 3 drowning people, and though I expected it, my chest still tightened. Dad sighed when I handed him the papers. "I warned them," he murmured, his voice tired but calm. "Greed makes fools of men." Daniel's reaction was sharper. He slammed the papers down on the kitchen table. "Let them come. I'll stand in that courtroom and tell the judge exactly what this farm means." And so, the final fight began. The courthouse was crowded the morning of the hearing. Word had spread through the community, and curious neighbors filled the benches, eager to witness the family feud that had become the talk of town. My siblings sat across the aisle, dressed sharply, their faces tight with indignation. Robert glared at me with icy hatred. Mark avoided my gaze entirely, jaw clenched, fists balled. Anna looked pale, as if she already regretted being there. Daniel sat beside me, steady and solid. His presence grounded me. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The proceedings began, my sibling's attorney launching into a fiery speech about unfair manipulation, emotional coercion, and betrayal of bloodlines. He painted me as a schemer, Daniel as an opportunist, and Dad as too frail to know what he was signing. But when Miss Lane rose, her voice cut clean and sharp through the noise. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. Mr. Whitfield signed the deed of his own free will, witnessed and notarized. The defendants acted within the law, and the plaintiff's objections are based not on fairness, but on greed." Then came the testimonies. Robert ranted about betrayal, his voice rising until the judge had to call him to order. Mark accused Daniel of manipulating Claire, his words dripping and with venom but lacking evidence. Anna broke down in tears, admitting under cross-examination that yes, she wanted money but only to make things easier for everyone. And then it was Daniel's turn. He stood tall, his hands folded in front of him. Your Honor, I never asked for this farm. But I worked it. Alongside my uncle. Alongside Claire. I fixed what was broken, I harvested what grew, I respected the land. The others? They left. They abandoned it. They only came back when there was money to be made. If this farm is to survive, it needs someone who cares about it, not someone who sees it as a paycheck. His words silenced the room. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, as if weighing every syllable. Finally, it was Dad's turn. Frail though he was, he insisted on speaking. His voice shook at first but grew stronger as he went on. This farm has been in my family for generations. It's not just property. It's our heritage. I signed those papers because I trust Daniel. Because I trust Claire. My other children. I love them. But they lost sight of what matters. This land deserves better. When he finished, the courtroom was silent. Even Robert had no rebuttal. The judge delivered his decision swiftly. The will is valid. The farm shall pass to Daniel Whitfield as designated. Case dismissed. A murmur rippled through the room, some gasps, some nods of approval. My siblings sat frozen, their faces masks of disbelief. I closed my eyes, exhaling relief. It was over. Robert stormed out first, slamming the doors so hard they rattled. Mark followed, muttering curses, his shoulders rigid with rage. Anna lingered for a moment, looking back at me with tear-streaked cheeks. I hope it was worth it, she whispered before leaving. But for me, it was worth everything. In the weeks that followed, the fallout grew. Robert's business partners began pulling away, whispering about his arrogance and failed lawsuit. Mark's marriage already strained, cracked under the weight of his anger. Anna withdrew into silence, avoiding both me and her brothers, ashamed of what she'd been part of. Meanwhile, the farm thrived. Daniel and I poured ourselves into it, not out of spite, but out of love. We rebuilt the barns, replanted parts of the orchard, mended what had been broken by neglect. Neighbors who once doubted us came to help, bringing tools, labor, and food. Slowly, the farm became more than just a legacy, it became a community. And with every passing day, I felt lighter. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and purple, Daniel and I sat on the porch with Dad between us. The fields stretched out before us, golden and endless. Dad squeezed my hand weakly. You did it, Claire, he said. You kept the promise. I swallowed hard, tears blurring my vision. We did it, Dad, Daniel and I. Daniel glanced at me, then at the horizon. This farm won't just survive, he said. It'll thrive, and we'll make sure it carries on not as a burden, but as a blessing. For once, I believed him completely. Because in the end, the farm wasn't about revenge, or even justice. It was about love for the land, for the people who had built it, for the generations to come. My siblings might never forgive me, but that no longer mattered. What mattered was that the farm was safe. And as the crickets sang and the stars began to appear, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. They told Dad to sell the farm, but I gave it to the cousin they despised. And in doing so, I gave it back to the future.